I think we're live streaming. Okay. Okay, Kiva, who are the sponsors?
Today's sponsorship is the Menzelevsky family in honor of the upcoming wedding of Heshi Menzelevsky to Chavi Martyr. It will take place Be'itoy Bismanu B'mkoimei this Thursday. The offer is this Shabbos, and by Dudy and Penny Zimmerman Liluy nishmas Sarah Tzirel Bas Aaron Chanoy Chakoy, and whose yartzeit is tomorrow. The neshama have an aliya.
Amen. Amen. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara, the Heilige Mishnah. We're going to try to learn a little bit extra today so that we can catch up. You know, clearly when Meir Shapiro's Zatzal was Miyasid Dafyomi, it was Rosh Hashanah. He had no doubt that his program would bring Mashiach by Tisha B'Av, and then there wouldn't be a problem of learning on Tisha B'Av, but that didn't happen. So we have to learn Tisha B'Av. So let's see what the Gemara says. Shoiver Adam es a chavis lechol himeno grogris. One may break open a barrel on Shabbos if it has. I got thrown off. But after I got thrown off, I changed my internet service. So hopefully this time it'll work. Let me share my Gemara again. Okay, so up to the Gemara. So you're allowed to break open the barrel to take groigris out of it, which are fig cakes. So Rashi says the chavos was a malaya, groigris, and you're allowed to cut it open, besaka the besayev, allowed to chop the head off of it. Lechol bimena groigris. To eat groigris, the ein b'mekalkel shumisa b'Shabbos. So what is the heter? The heter is that when you're chopping the top off the barrel, you're not making a keli, you're actually ruining a keli, and therefore you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. So if you have a sealed barrel, you're allowed to chop off the top of it. Zok the heilige Mishnah weiter, ubavachli schaven lasis kli. In other words, lenoik ve'yafa b'Pesach. No, you can't try to really make it nice. You just have to be breaking it open to get out from it what you need. And you're not allowed to make a hole in the tar that seals the barrel. You're not allowed to make a hole there. Rather, you have to chop the whole thing off. And Rashi says, if you're just making a hole in it, misak and pischa, that's called a tikkun. That's called like completing the barrel, and that would be a problem. That's the very Agudah. The Chum Matirin, the Chum say you're allowed to make a little hole, like a spigot hole in the side of the barrel in the megufa, because that's not the normal way to make an opening in the barrel, and therefore it's not considered misak and mana. And the Gemara is going to get into details of exactly what are you allowed to drill into the side of the barrel and what not. You're not allowed to make a hole in the side of the barrel. And again, the Gemara is going to get into the details. The Gemara is going to drill down, pun intended. The Moshe Nekuva, what if there's a hole in the barrel and it's leaking and you want to seal it? Lo yitein ala shaiva, do not put wax on it. Because the likelihood is that you're going to smear that wax, and smearing the wax actually falls under the category of one of the malachos involved in preparing the hide. In the city of Erev, a story came to Rabbi Yochanan Zaki where someone did seal the barrel with wax. He said, I'm afraid that he might be chayv. The actual putting the wax inside the hole isn't the problem. The problem is you smear it around. And that smearing around is what could be a deraisa. The type of figs that you're allowed to take this sword and chop the top of the barrel off to get figs out are only if the figs are pressed together. You know why? Because we have another problem. The Gemara is introducing another problem, and that's muksa. There's a shita of Rabbi Nechemiah that we learned several times throughout the Masechta, who has a shita that even a klisha malach telaheter, even your fork and knife, your cutlery, you're not allowed to move them as muksa only for their properly intended purpose. So, for instance, you're allowed to use your fork to eat meat, but if you want to scratch yourself, you're not allowed to use a fork for that because that's not the intended purpose. That's not the purpose what a fork is for. You're only allowed to move kelim with a fork. So you have this big knife. A knife is muksa. The only thing you're allowed to do with knives are cut food apart. So how could you have picked up this knife to chop the top of the barrel off? You're not allowed to use a knife to chop barrels off. The teretz is the reason why you pick up the knife is because you have pressed figs and you need to cut them and separate them apart. So you were allowed to pick up the knife because you're going to use it to separate the figs once you open the barrel. Once you have it in your hand, you're allowed to hold it. Then you could chop the top off of the barrel and start slicing up the fig cake. If in this barrel there are only individual dates, individual figs, individual pears, loy, then you wouldn't even be allowed to pick up the knife because it would be muksa. Are you telling me that a knife is muksa only for you're only allowed to use it for its purpose? Maybe Adam is a chavish al yayin. You're allowed to bring a barrel of wine, umatis roisha b'sayif, and you're allowed to chop its top off with a sword. Umanicha lefnei orchim b'Shabbos, and you're allowed to serve this wine to orchim. Bein choshes, you don't have to worry. Well, how did he pick up that knife? He definitely didn't need it to slice the wine that was inside the barrel. So that's going according to the shita of the Rabbanon, which we also hold like that you're allowed to use a klisha malach leheter for anything you want, and they don't have the restriction that the Nechemia has that you're not allowed to lift anything only for its properly intended purpose. Zok Gemara weiter. Hey Rabbanon, masnisin Rab Nechemia. The Mishnah that doesn't allow you to hold a knife is Rab Nechemia. Frek the Gemara, umay duchke Rab Oishia lokli masnisin Rab Nechemia ubedrusos. Why did Rab Oishia say the Mishnah is going according to a shita that we don't hold like Rab Nechemia, that you're only allowed to pick up a knife for its intended purpose, and because of that, you have to make a new kimt in the Mishnah and say that what's inside this barrel are pressed figs. He could have just said it's speaking by the loose pears, and it's going to go to the Rabbanon that you're allowed to lift up a knife, even though you're using it for its not primary intended purpose. Amar Ravashi Masnisa Kishise. Rabbi Yosy had a dik in the Mishnah Mineu Bay to indicate that this is dafka speaking about fruits that are pressed together. Because my area the tani groigros. Why of all different types of fruit did the Tana decide to discuss figs? Listnei pears. He could have said general terms. Any pears that are in a barrel, you use the knife to chop it open. The fact that the Tana selected a specific type of peri, groigros, it must be because he's trying to indicate to us another halacha that you only picked up the knife because you'd have to cut these pressed figs apart. So once the Tana told us it has to be speaking by pressed figs, Rabbi Yosy said, why would the Tana want to do that? It must be to teach us a side halacha that you would only be allowed to pick up the knife in the first place because you needed to cut apart the figs. Tanya Chada, Choislois shall groigros, we shall tomorrow. Choislois are baskets that are sort of made out of reeds, and they're supported with ropes, and then you tie the ropes on top to seal them to seal together, similar to a sack of onions that you buy in the supermarket today, sort of a netting, and it's tied at the top. So the lock is mat, you're allowed to open up, untie, provided that it wasn't a kesher shel kayama, you're allowed to untie the ropes on top to open up the top of this basket. Umafkia, and you could take these items out. Matu, you could untie it. Umafkia v'choitech, Rashi says you're even allowed to pull apart the ropes of the actual basket or cut open the actual basket. Utanya idich, another Rashi says, Matu, you're allowed to open up the top. Avaloi mafkia v'loi choitech, you're not allowed to rip apart the side walls of the basket. So that's a steer. We're lokasha harabanan harab nechemia. One's going according to Rabbanon, and one's going according to Rab Nechemia. So what is the shaila? How could you pick up a knife to cut open the side of this basket? You're only allowed to use a knife to cut up food. So you're right. The bride said it holds you know how to cut it open is going according to Rabbi Nechemia because you couldn't pick up the knife. And the Brisa that says you're allowed to is going according to the Rabbanim. Zok to Gemara Vaytu. The Tanya Rabbi Nechemia, Afilu Tarvit, even a spoon, Vafilu Talis, even a beged, Vafilu Sakin, even a knife, Ein Nitlin, Elo L'tzorich Tashmishin. You're only allowed to carry them for their purpose. According to Rabbi Nechemia, you're not even allowed to sit by your Shabbos table and play around with your cutlery. You're only allowed to touch things that are directly related to their proper intended purpose, and that is to use for food. So our mission discusses chopping the whole top off. That you're for sure not allowed to do. That for sure you are allowed to do. And then putting in a proper spigot that for sure you're not allowed to do. Well, what if I just take a spear and I just poke a hole into the barrel on Shabbos? When you're doing that, are you trying to make a proper opening and it's masakin moneh, and therefore you're going to be chayiv v'asir? Or maybe you're trying to be generous to your guests and you're saying, here, take as much wine as you want. So you make a big hole. He answered, that person is trying to make an opening in this barrel, a permanent opening, which would be masak in the keli, asr, and it would be asr. My grandmother told me that when the Russian soldiers to liberate Romania, in her town in Romania, everybody had wine cellars in their basement. The Russian soldiers were so hungry and they were so wild, they would go into people's basements with their rifles, shoot a hole in the barrels. They were too impatient to open up the spigot and to take a glass of wine. They just shot holes in the barrels of people's basements, and they put their mouth to just suck in the wine as it was pouring out of the barrels. It was so strong, the wine, and they were in sealed basements that the soldiers, from the fumes of the wine, collapsed, and many of these soldiers died and drowned in 4 or 5 inches of wine because they collapsed on the floor of the cellars. The barrels drained, and they drowned in 4 inches of wine.
You know, and fitting with the Gemara that says that La'ilam Yispal Adam Livrav Loi Misa Yafa, for a guy that could be heaven, started heaven earlier.
Are you hearing that feedback?
Yes, you're gonna have to mute 3 people here, or make me host.
Okay, let me make you host. It's easier.
Before I mute myself, can I ask a question?
Sure.
You can watch it on YouTube.
Just a bit in general, the defendant's stuff seems to be very, very consistent.
Chaim Tzvi, it's very, very muffled.
Okay, so then you know what? I'm going to leave it alone until after the show.
Okay, thank you. So that was the shaila. Are you allowed to just puncture the barrel with the spear? So he said, the Rav Paskin, that it would be asur. So Rav Sheshes Paskin, it would be asur. Meisvei, Rav Shimon Gamliel, I remember maybe Adam Chavish Al Yain, Umat is Rosh B'Sayif. Rav Shimon Gamliel said, you're allowed to chop off the top of a barrel with a knife. So why can't I poke a hole in the side of it with a spear? So Gemara, Hasan Vadel and Yafam Achavim. When you're chopping off the top of the barrel, that for sure you're not intending to make an opening. But Hacha, if that was his intention, just to open it up so people could take a lot, then he should have chopped off the top. But the fact that he poked his spear, he pierced the spear into the side of the barrel, clearly indicates that he was trying to make access to the barrel on the side, which would be improving the barrel.
What do we say that that's more of a not masakim,
it's makam.
No, I'm saying, but Mikal, no, is it more like
it's only Mikalkel if it's damaging, like chopping off the top of the barrel. But when you're drilling a hole in the side of the barrel, you're actually preparing it to install a faucet.
Spigot. And then I'm assuming according to Nechemia, let's use a hammer to open the nuts is not allowed because
according to Nechemia, not. That's right. He doesn't even know Klisha Malach Leheter. Kol Shekei Klisha Malach Leheter. That's right. Nechemia is very makbid. Zaktumor. Ein nagfin mugufa. Amar Buna machloikis l'mayla. This that we have a machloikis. What was the shaila in our Mishnah? The shaila in the Mishnah was if you're allowed to make a hole, drill through the tar inside the barrel. So we have a chalokes between Yehuda who disallows it and the Chachamim who allow it. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Buddha machlokes l'mayla. The machlokes is only if you're allowed to make this hole on top of the barrel. Avam and tzad, if you want to go into the side of the barrel through this magufa, through this tar area that creates the seal, divrei hakoil aser. Everybody would agree that's usher. That's definitely the place to make holes in barrels at the side. That definitely is a pesach, and that would be usher. Behind the Ketani, and that's why right after the Mishnah quotes the machlokes, you have Yehuda who disallows it, and the Chum who allow it. It says lo yikaveda mitzida, because that's telling us that side the Chachamim and side Yehuda, even the Chachamim who are matir to drill a hole on top, does not allow it on the side. Reb Chisda amar machlokes minatzad. No, the Rabbanan are matir even minatzad. Aval gaba, but if the hole is on top, divrei hakoil mutter. Even Rabbi Yehuda, the first time in our Mishnah, would hold that it's a mutter. And what does it mean you shouldn't make a hole at the side? Because the Mishnah says right after that, everybody agrees you shouldn't make a hole at the side. That's not in the tar, in the seal area. That's actually in the wood of the barrel. That's where everybody agrees you're not allowed to drill a hole, because that's clearly an installation of a spigot. You're not allowed to make a new hole in a keli on Shabbos. But if there's already a hole and you want to increase the hole, that you're allowed to do. And there are those who hold that even in an existing hole, you're not allowed to increase its size. But the Shavin, they both agree, if you had an old hole that got plugged up, you're allowed to reopen up that hole, because that's for sure not considered making a Pesach. Rashi says, it was already there, the hole. The fact that it was sealed doesn't mean anything, and therefore everybody agrees you're allowed to reopen the hole that was plugged. A nekav chodesh is not allowed to be made in the barrel, yet you're allowed to enlarge an existing hole. So ma'ishna mi nekav chodesh taloi become a sakin pischa, because you're making you're fixing the side of the barrel, you're making an opening. Why do you allow us to enlarge a hole that's also fixing it? Rashi says, you're making it bigger. So we're dealing with makah b'patish. If the door isn't made to allow things out and in, it's not a pesach. So whenever you make a spigot at the side of the barrel, which is only made to extract some wine out of the barrel, but when you load the barrel, you load it through the top. So technically, it's never called a pesach when you're drilling a hole at the side of the barrel for a spigot. It's only v'rabbanan hu de gozer mishum lul shotar negolim. The rabbanan were gozer because making the opening in a chicken coop, which was like a wooden box that chickens were held in, they would drill a hole on top, a ventilation opening. The ovid liyuli avira, it's made to allow air in for the chickens to breathe, to let some of the odor out. And there, Vimbala Haisif, Moisif, Asufe, Vadai, Belushal. I'm sorry. So the only reason why they asked it by a barrel is because Auto Alushal Tanagolim, which is made for both ways, and that's going to be usher. But Vimbala Haisif, Moisif, if you want to enlarge an existing hole in a keli, that I do allow you to do, because it's Sufei Vadai, Belushal Tanagolim, like Usher Sufei. In a Lushal Tanagolim, you'll make a hole. You will make a hole in it, but you're never going to increase the hole in a Lushal Tanagolim. And Rashi says the reason why one would never increase the size of a hole that's in a Lushal Tanagolim is because we don't want to allow rodents in, because rodents can get in and attack your chickens. So you'll never increase the hole. So therefore, to make a hole in the keli, we don't allow you to do it. Or two, you might make a hole in the Lushal Tanagolim. But once there's already a hole there, we allow you to increase the hole in a barrel or in a keli, and we're not goji, you'll increase the hole in a lul. Because in a lul, we don't want to have a bigger hole because it's going to allow rodents in, and those will eat up and damage your chickens. Mishum riksha, because of rodents. V'yesh oimrim, ein moishivin. The second sheet in the brisa was you're not even allowed to increase the size of a hole in a barrel, because I do have to be gozer atulul. You don't want to increase the size of the hole because you don't want rodents to get in. No, zonin deloy takne meikara. Maybe the original hole that was made in the hole was never big enough, even for the purposes of ventilation. And you might come to make that bigger. So therefore, we'll also outlaw the increasing the size of a hole in the keli as well. That ain't my sifin l'chomer. So l'chomer, you're not allowed to make a hole at the side of the keli, and you're not allowed to enlarge an existing hole that's there. But if it's plugged, you're allowed to take out the plug. And now the Gemara is going to discuss that part. It depends on where this plug was. If this plug was in a place where the only reason why they put a cover in the hole was not to protect wine from leaking out, but protect air, stop air from getting into the barrel, because that might ruin the wine, such a plug you're allowed to take out. But if you put the plug in to stop a leak, that plug is for sure much stronger and much more permanent, and therefore it would be usher to open up such an opening. So if it's a shvacha sealed hole, you're allowed to open it up. But if it's a very well sealed hole, then it will be usher. Give me an example of a hole that you would say is just to stop air from getting in, and give me an example of a hole that's made to strengthen the barrel, not to leak. Very simple. If it's above the wine level, that's clearly only stopping air from getting in. If you're below the water level or the wine level, that's clearly a stronger patch that's not allowing it to leak. Rabba Omar, the Bach changed it to Rabba. Even if you're below the water line, that's also called the shamer, and it's also mutter to open up. If it's all the way at the bottom, then it has the full weight of all the wine in that barrel. It's subject to much more pressure. There, if you made a seal, it's going to be a very strong seal, and that's the seal that's also to remove. But if it's on the side of the barrel, even though it's below the water level, where the pressure isn't so high, you'd be allowed to open up such a seal, because even that seal is not considered permanent. We actually have a tanya that brings you a raya that to this concept that it's not considered that you've eliminated the hole completely unless it's a very serious seal. But if it's not a very serious seal, we don't consider it that you totally eliminated the original hole, and therefore you're allowed to open it up again. And the raya is from a totally different subject. Bayis sosum. So the halacha is, let's say there's two residents that share a chatzer. So you have a big open courtyard, and each of the residents have their house open up to that chatzer. Now, they decided that they want to split the chatzer. Right now, they share the chatzer. They both have common use of it. Now they decide that they want to split up. They don't want to share the chatzer anymore. So the question is, how do they split it up? So I'm going to just draw a little picture that will depict what we're talking about. Let's say this is the chatzer, and this is one guy's house that opens up to the chatzer. This is the other guy's house that opens up to the chatzer. This guy happens to have one door, and this guy happens to have two doors that open up to the chatzer. So the halach is, when they split the chatzer, first each guy gets, whatever the width of his door is, he gets 4 amas that belong exclusively to him. And big guy, this guy has 2 doors, he gets twice that. For each door, he gets 4 amas. The width of his door, he extends out 4 amas. And then the rest of the space, they split 50-50. But for every doorway you have, you get a piece of property exclusive to yourself. That's the width of your doorway that extends 4 amas out. Now, what happens if you had a doorway, but you plugged it up? You filled it in with brick. So do you still get that 4 amas or not? So you see it's relevant to the discussion of when something's plugged up, is it considered permanent or not? And the Gemara is going to discuss what's considered plugging up a doorway. So the Gemara says as follows. If somebody had a bayis sosum and they're splitting up their chatzer, yesh le arba amos. Even if the door was sealed, but the doorway is still there, he just filled in the doorway, he still gets that as his doorway, and he still gets 4 amos into the chatzer, the width of his doorway. But Paritz at Spasimov, what if he went and ripped out the doorposts? So now you don't need to see the frame of the door anymore. You totally ripped out the doorpost and you bricked it in. That means there's no more doorway here. And then Ein Loy Dal Ramas. So you see from here that a permanent closure, when you totally ripped out the doorpost and you bricked it in completely, that's called completely sealed. Similar to in our case, where if it's below the water line, it's a more permanent seal, that's considered also to open up again. But if you didn't take the doorpost out, you just filled in the inside of the doorpost, that's not so permanent, and that's something that we say is still considered like there's a Pesach there. By Yisosam, Einu Etama Kol Seviva. The halacha is like a mausoleum, oil that's built over a grave. If it's totally sealed, then it's considered a grave. And therefore, the Rabbanan made a gzera that if you come within 4 amos of a grave, you're also tamei. And I made that gzera to keep people away from being tamei. But if you just close the door, but you didn't take out the doorposts, then it's not matama svivav. It doesn't have the status of a grave yet. It's not matama 4 amos around it. But parts it's p'tzimov. If you sealed the door and you also ripped out the doorposts, then matame kol svivav. So the point is, there's a distinct difference between a permanent closing of an original hole or a temporary closing.
Yes, just quickly, the purpose of the Dalet Amos for the doorway is for what? So the Balabos takes a chrayas for it. It's part of his rishus.
It's part of his rishus. I mean, when we're splitting up a chatzer, why I get exclusive rights to that strip of land in front of my house?
Yes.
Because it's my entranceway. It's like my front porch.
And therefore, it's part of his own rishus hayochid.
Correct.
Okay.
Zaktamar Gufsa. What is the halacha? If what they used to do is they wanted to put a faucet like a spigot into the whole side of the barrel. So they used to take a hollow reed that acted like a straw or like a pipe, and they would insert that into the hole at the side of the barrel to act as a spout. So the question is, Gufsa, this spout, Rav Asher Shmuel Shari. Rav says Asher and Shmuel hold its mutter. What exactly are you doing with the spout? What precisely are we discussing that Rav prohibits and Shmuel allows? Zok Gemara, mechatich lechatchila, to actually trim it down with a scissors to fashion a proper spigot out of this reed. The chul amal pli asher. That's 100% asher. You're finishing off a keli. Ahadure, if it was already installed in the barrel, the chul amal pli shari. Everybody holds. You're allowed to, if it fell out, you're allowed to put it back in. Keep ligi the machloikis. Rav and Shmuel is the chaticha v'lo misakta. You've already measured it up and cut it and trimmed it, and now the question is, you just want to install it into the side of the barrel. Manda aser, Rav, who doesn't allow you to do that, we're afraid if we allow you to fit it into the barrel, we're afraid if it doesn't fit perfectly, you're going to trim it and adjust it, and that would be a big problem. Manda Shari, Shmuel holds its mutter, Loiger's reading holds that once it's trimmed and you just install it, you're allowed to put it in. Kitanoi, we actually have a similar machlokes noim. Ein chaytkin shreiferes b'yomtiv. You're not allowed to cut a shreiferes b'yomtiv. Again, it's the same type of thing that we're doing. And you're for sure not allowed to cut it on Shabbos. But nafla, if it fell out, machzir noisa b'Shabbos, you're allowed to put it back on Shabbos. And it's poshut that you're allowed to put it back on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yosy Mekel. So, practically more, Rabbi Yosy Ahai. What is Rabbi Yosy referring to? The Brisa discussed 2 cases. Ilema Reisha, where it says, Ein chaytchen shreiferes b'Yom Tov, how could you say that Rabbi Yosy would allow it? Hakam saken mana. You're literally trimming something and you're finalizing a keli. So you can't say Rabbi Yosy Mekel there. Ela Seifa. Elamai, talking about the Seifa, where it says machzirin b'Shabbos. Well, Tanakama nami mishra kashari. The Tanakama also says machzirin b'Shabbos. So on what that the Chacham said is Rabbi Yosy a further mekel. Elot must be the case that we determined is the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. The chaticha, you've already cut it and trimmed it. You have not yet installed it in the barrel. That's where you have the machlokes Rabbi Yosy and the Tanakama. Mar sover gazrinon. The Tanakama holds your geyser like Rav. Umar sover loy gazrinon, and Rabbi Yosy would have loy gazrinon like Shmuel. Dosh Rabbi Sheshe b'rei Rabbi Idi mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. Allah Rabbi Yosy l'kula. So we're passing like Shmuel l'kula, which is interesting because normally we pass like Rav in things of Isser V'Heter, but here Rabbi Yosy the Tal is Mekel, so we're passing like Shmuel. If the barrel already had a hole, you're allowed to reopen the hole. So Mishcha, what's the halacha? We said that you're not. The Mishnah says if there's a hole in the side of the barrel, you're not allowed to fill it with wax because we're afraid you're going to smear the wax on the side of the barrel near the hole, which is mimareach, which was an Isser D'Oraisa. How about Mishcha? What about oil, which is not nearly as thick as wax? It's still a thick type of oil that you could fill with. It's more like a gel probably, but it's not as thick as wax. Rav Aser Shmuel Shari. Mand Aser, Rav holds it's Aser Gezrina Mishum Shaiva. We're afraid if we allow this oil paste, people will also use wax. Mand Shari like Gezrina. Amalei Rav Shmuel bar Rab Chanel Rab Yosef. Beferish Amartan Mishmei de Rav Mishcha Shari. Rav said this halacha that Mishcha Shari is he said it beferish, it's mutter. Amar Tavus Rishba. Tavus, the trapper. Rishba means that he was a trapper, he was a hunter, that was his job. Amar Lot Mishmei de Rav Mishcha Shari. Amar Tavus Rishba. Amar Shmuel. Hai Tarfa the Asa Aser. Tarfa the Asa is Aser. Rashi says what you want to do is you take a leaf from a hadas plant and you fold it and you put it into the barrel so it acts like a shtickle spout. So that would be Aser to do. There's a little bit of a shaila why it's Aser. Rashi says you put it into the hole in the side of the barrel. The leaf is in the shape of a spout, and the wine will come out of it. So you're not even allowed to use that, even though it's in the right shape. My timer, why is it Aser? It's because we're afraid if we let you put that leaf in the side of the barrel, you might actually build an eave on the side of your roof because it's the same type of structure. So Rashi is merely by using this leaf, it will be merely using the leaf as Aser because it's Xera, you might actually build an eave for your home. Tosfos argues a little bit, and Tosfos says as follows: where you shouldn't build a eaves for your home. The kasha to the gufsa nami nigzer by gufsa, which was a reed. We said earlier, there's no problem. We passed in the kula. Near the Rebbe kapir shakudish lo yisakin marzav liyenoi sheyipol ayayin besoichoy v'yelech l'merchak. The cheshalakeach alo shel hados. When you take this leaf, and you actually make it, you fold it into a marziv, it looks like you're building something. By gufsa, you're just sticking a reed in the hole of a barrel, there is not a problem. So Tosfos is actually explaining Rashi, and he's saying Rashi is saying that using this leaf is a problem. The problem is forming the leaf into the shape of an eave. That's also because if you form a leaf into the shape of an eave, you might actually build an eave for your home. Rabashi Omar, the reason why it's Aser because we're afraid you're going to cut it off. Now, of course, you're not going to cut it off from a plant. That's mamish a major deraisa. The Xer is if it's connected to a twig, but it's not connected to the ground, the twig is already cut off, we're afraid you're going to chop it off there, and that's called masakin kli. My benai, what's the difference if we ask her using this leaf because of Xer Shem Yiktaim, or if we ask her using this leaf because we're afraid you're going to make an eve? So tomorrow, the katan umanchi. The nafkamin is if the leaf was already chopped off from the twig, according to Rabashi, now it would be mutter. But according to Rav Yemar, it's still Aser because if you fold the leaf into shape, we're gosher that you might make an eve for your house. Beisadya. Beisadya is felt, but this is the felt of the little three bears. Of Goldilocks and the three bears. It wasn't too soft and it wasn't too hard. It was just right. So the halach is this beisadya was normally used as padding for a chair to sit on. But what if a guy wanted to take it somewhere and he wanted to carry it mishush l'shus? So he wants to put it sort of wrap it around himself as a beged. So the question is it considered a beged? Even though that's not really what he's going to use it for, he's just wearing it to transport. Or is it considered a masoi, and therefore he will not be able to carry it from Rishus Hayach to Rishus Hayach. So Rav Aser Shmuel Shari. Birachin, if it's very soft, Do kul amal pligi shari. Everybody agrees you could because people wear that as a beged. It's normal. Big kashan if it's very thick and hard. Do kul amal pligi asher. Everybody agrees asher. Ki pligi b'mitzi. If it's just right, that's what they argue. Man the asher. Rav holds it's asher michsi kamasri. He holds it still looks like a masri. It's not there to wear. Man the shari la michsi kamasri doesn't look like a load. Zoktim v'hod the Rav lava ferishitmar. This that we quoted from Rav that wearing the beisadja is asher. That he didn't say beferish. The previous halacha, he said beferish. But this halacha, he didn't say beferish. So the halacha, the Rav said you can't use a thick oil to fill a hole, that he paskin beferish. But this that he said you can't wear the felt, he didn't say beferish. It's from a story that occurred that we deduced Rav's shita in this halacha. Why? The Rav ikloy lahu asra. He once showed up with his talmidim to a hotel. They did not have enough room in the hotel for all his talmidim, so he ended up having to sleep on the street. Novak Yosy b'charmelis. He went to sleep on the street. Rav was there. He was a chashav yid. So the hotel manager said, "Listen, I don't have a room for you, but let me give you a pillow." Aisile beisadja. He gave him this beisadja. Lo Yosef. Rav didn't want to use it. He didn't want to sit on this beisadja. Man the chazah, people who observed this happening, where Rav refused to take the beisadja. He thought it's because it was osir for the fellow to bring the beisadja from the hotel out to the street, and that's why Rav refused it. But that's not why. Rav has no problem with this. Rav holds you could wear such a thing, and Rav maybe would agree to Shmuel. But rather, the Rav, we know for a fact that Rav publicly paskined that this is mutter, so he doesn't know that it's osir. He had some very chashav talmidim with him who were not offered this bedding. So he said, how can I go sleep on a soft bedding when my talmidim are sleeping on the hard ground? Which were the talmidim who Rav didn't want who Rav was worried about their COVID? Rav kind of basi. Since they didn't have bedding, Rav said, there's no way I'm going to sleep on bedding if they don't have.
Yes, I don't want to bring that. I don't want to bring. I know you're in a rush, but there's a famous story with the brisker Rav coming to the hotel. You know that story? And then the guy didn't know who it was. He said, I'm sold out. He said, please, please. And the brisker Rav ends up sleeping in the fireplace. I don't know if it's a true story or not. I'm not enamored with that story. But based on this, and then the brisker Rav chastises the hotel owner, you would have done this to another yid. That's problematic.
That's right.
But based on the Gemara here, the hotel owner said, oh, you're sleeping on the ground. Here's a pillow. He didn't say, "Oy vey, how could you sleep outside?"
In that place, you know.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, go weiter.
It could be Rav was concerned about social distancing during COVID. He wanted to sleep outside. In the bar, it's normally cooler. You have a pot of food. You don't want it to go bad, so you want to keep it in a bar where it's a little bit cooler. You're allowed to do that. If you have good, clean water, but it's warm, and you have a big vat of dirty water, of gray water, you're allowed to take the bottle. Let's say you have a water bottle that's warm. You're allowed to drop it into a rain barrel that has cold water in it to cool the water off. And if you want to warm food up or warm up water, you're allowed to put it in the sun. So this is the video that I showed at the beginning of a guy who fell into the mikve. This is a guy whose kalim got wet, his clothing got wet. And Tosfos discusses it. Tosfos says, it's not pshat he got wet in the rain. He fell into the mikve. Tosfos says he fell into the mikve. And that's why I showed the video to him. He got wet in the rain. This means he fell into the mikveh. So the Mishnah is discussing a case of a guy who fell into the mikveh. So someone who fell into the mikveh, the halach is mahalach ben, he doesn't have to get undressed in public. He can continue walking with them till he gets home. Once he gets into his outer courtyard, he's allowed to spread him out to dry in the sun. People shouldn't see. Because if people see, they're going to think that he did laundry on Shabbos. So therefore, you shouldn't put it in front of everybody. Why can't I put a pot into a barrel to keep cool? There's no reason why it should be also. What if the bottom of the bar is there's a hole? It's not even. So you might think that a guy would smooth out the bottom of the bar so his pot should sit straight. Kamashlan, you're not worried about somebody doing that. Pshita, why shouldn't I be able to do that? I'm just putting one water into another water, cold into cold. So tomorrow safe it's strichale. It says you're allowed to put cold water into warm water. In fact, pshita, that's also pushing. Why would I think you couldn't do that? So you might think that if we allow you to put water in the sun, you might also put it into coals. That's also the rise of Kamash Malon. So the chiddush of Tanya B'chama is that you don't make a gzera, you might put it in coals. And once the Mishnah mentions Tanya B'chama, the Mishnah also mentions Mayim Yafim L'soich Mayim Roim B'kulaf. Misha Noshru, his clothing got wet. How could you allow a guy to put his clothing out to dry where nobody sees it? Marisayin is even b'chadr chadar. So how could you allow him to hang up his clothing where no one's going to see it? So tomorrow, Tanan shoytchen b'chama avaloiken negaram. I'm sorry. Rav said afilu b'chadr. So the Gemara asked on Rav Tanan in our Mishnah shoytchen b'chama avaloiken negaram. So Gemara Tanoi, it's actually a machlokes Tanoim if you're allowed to do something b'chadr chadarim if the issue is marisayin. The Tanya shoytchen b'chama avaloiken negaram. So you see a machlokes Tanoim whether or not you're allowed to do something al t'mar sign if nobody sees. Amar Buna, Hamanar Talisha b'Shabbos. Rashi says that he had dust on it, and he wants to shake the dust off. Tosha holds it had to be wet because there's no mokim to be gosher for kibbutz unless there's liquid involved. And they ask on Rashi because Rashi in other places as well says it has to be wet. But Akolbam, you shake it out on Shabbos. Chayiv chatos. We didn't say this only if it's new clothing, and the whole shadow what new clothing means. But the primary issue is if someone's makbid on it. Al batiki, if it's older clothing, it's not makbid unless labah, then there's no issur. We only say that it's also to shake off this dirt or this towel if it's black, because by black people are more makbid that it should be clean. Al b'chivi v'sumki, if it's white or red, less labah, we don't have that problem. But who the couple at the end of the day, even if it's black, it has to be a guy who's makbid on it. Otherwise, there's no issur. Ula showed up to Pumadisa. He saw people that were shaking out their clothing. Amar, he was a kanoi. You're being machal Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, don't listen to Ula. He's a fanatic. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and the food to the do it in his face, shake it out in his face. We have no problem. Anan loy kaptina mini. We're not makbid. There's no problem. Abaye v'koika made Rabbi Yosef. Abaye was in front of Rabbi Yosef. Amar Rabbi Yosef told Abaye, "Havli kumsoi. Please pass me my hat." Abaye saw there was dew on the hat was wet, so he was afraid to take it because he thought you weren't allowed to shake off the dew. He was hesitating to pass Rabbi Yosef's hat. Amalei, no problem. The fights, Shadi, shake it out, no problem. I'm not like Abdinamidi. We're not makbid on dew on our hats, and therefore by us there's no problem shaking it out. What if you have a talus and you put it on normally, and then you fold it up all the way that it should go over your shoulders like a prayer shawl? Chayiv chatus, you're chayiv chatus because that's not the normal way to wear a talus. People who sell begodim, they also fold up the talisim over their shoulders. Because that's not the normal way to wear something. It's considered a masui. We're not only talking to the merchants, every person who dresses this way would be also on Shabbos. Normally, it's morchim who wear their talis in this fashion. What about a chavani who has money like on a necklace on the shmata, on his scarf that he wore? He'll be chayav chados. Not only a chavani, anyone who wears money this way, it's called a masui. It's not derech malbish. But since normally chavani goes out that way, that's why the Mishnah, the Brisa addresses this halacha to chavani. Written were people from a certain city. Yosy Mesutin, they used to wear. I think they were travelers. They were peddlers. but it says from a place. Rashi says they would also wear some type of kerchief, and they're allowed to wear it if it's on their shoulders. Anybody. It's normal for them to go out this way, and they're allowed to go out this way because it's the normal way to wear this type of kerchief. Hyrcanus, the son of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. So Hyrcanus, who's named after his grandfather, he went out with this scarf around his neck on Shabbos. But he had a little string going from this scarf to his finger that was wrapped around. I guess so it shouldn't blow away in the wind. I believe Rashi says so it shouldn't blow away in the wind. Rashi so it shouldn't blow away. And what happened? When the Chacham saw what he did, Amur said, he would still have been allowed to wear it. The halacha is you're allowed to wear this scarf over your shoulders, even though it's not tied down. Ula came to the house of Asi Barhini, and he asked him the following question. Now, this isn't the same marzav that we discussed earlier. This is a certain way of wearing his clothing. You sort of fold up your clothing are very long, so you sort of tie him up with a rope to keep him higher. Amalu, he said, Hachi Amar Rabbaloi, Osir Lasos Marzav b'Shabbos. It's Osir to fold up your clothing that way on Shabbos, because that's not the way to wear it. My Marzav, what is this Marzav? Amar Rabzera Kisi Bavlaisa. It's the Bavliim who had long clothing, they would tie up the sides of their kalim to it shouldn't touch the ground. Let's see what Rashi says. Kisa Bavlaisa, Shemisalkin Big Dayim in the Aretz, they would lift up their clothing from the ground, because they were too long. The Koifel they would fold them towards the top. And they held it up through ropes.
Sounds like a kapota.
That's right. It's like you folded up a kapota, but they tied it that way. So it looked like an eavesdrop around his body. So Zok to Gemara, what's the halacha? Are you allowed to do that? You're not allowed to. My marzav, I'm Rabzera, Kisav of Lisa. Rabbi Yirmiyah Yosef Kamed Rabzera. Amalei Hachimai. He showed him. He demonstrated. Am I allowed to do it this way? Again, I don't have a video, so I don't know what he did exactly. Amalei Osir. This would not be allowed. Hachimai. What about this way? Amalei Osir. Amar Papa and the Kokai Kloi B'Yadecha. This is the general rule as to what's mutter and what's not. Kol Adat de Lechnufe Osir. If you folded it up because you're trying to fold it permanently, that's Osir to wear. Colorless noise, if you're doing because it's the style, like if you're wearing your pants really low because that's the style, and say no to crack, shori, that's mutter. So anything that's the style, you're doing it to look cool, it's trendy, that you're allowed to do. But if you're doing it just to fold up, that's not allowed to be done. He would fold it up to make it look good. Once upon a time, Rebbe went out to the field. And the two sides of his beged were on his shoulder. So Amar Lefanav Yeshua ben Zirah ben Chamav Rebbe Meir. Reb Shua told this to Rebbe, Bezu loy chayev Reb Meir chatos. Didn't Reb Meir said that this is also to do on Shabbos and the Zachiv chatos? Amar lei dikdik Reb Meir at kan. Are you telling me that Reb Meir was so makvid? But Rebbe accepted it. But Shilshul Rebbe Talisoi. But he did put his talis right down. He didn't want to violate what Rebbe Meir held would be usher. This didn't happen with Yeshua ben Ziras. El Yeshua ben Kefusoi Haya Chasna Bekiva. And he said, Amar Bezu Loi Chayv Rabbi Kiva Chatas. He told Rebbe, didn't Rabbi Kiva say you Chayv Chatas for doing this? Amar Lei, and Rabbi answered, Diktik Rabbi Kiva At Kan. Rabbi Kiva was so makbid that you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos, but Rabbi accepted. Shilshal Rabbi Talisai. Kiyos Rabbi Shmuel Bar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Nishalitmar. It doesn't say that he asked it. He said he asked the Shaila, which means Nishalitmar Lo Yeremai Sezela Rebbe. This didn't happen to Rebbe. Elashol Lefanov. Rebbe didn't actually do it. Rather, they asked Rebbe Mal Lotisboy. They asked Rebbe, you're allowed to go out. Ubikesh Lahater, and Rebbe wanted to be mater. At your Amul Lefanov Mishum Reb Meir Chayav Chatos. The Ewe Sover, Rebbe thought, it's not totally folded up. The back of his beged was not on the shoulder. That hung all the way down. He only folded up the sides. So Habesover derech malbushu. Rebbe thought there was derech malbush. So it's the same story, but instead of Rebbe actually doing it, and it comes out that Rebbe was over the Raisa according to Meir Rebbe Kiva, Rebbe never did it. This whole story happened that they came to ask Rebbe if you're allowed to, and Rebbe at first was matir, but then he was maskim. He accepted the psak of either of Meir Rebbe Kiva to aser. Okay, let's stop here. So we're halfway caught up. What time are we learning about the Shabbos? Are we sticking to 10:30? Everyone's on mute, so I'm going to assume.
No. So Yosy, no, 1 second. Is anybody are you available to learn on Shabbos? I realize you only give one shear on Shabbos. You should be giving two. Any chance you want to learn maybe at 6 o'clock? Shmuel, if you walk down, I'll give you popcorn and water.
Still too nervous about eating food.
What's that?
I'm not eating that. I'm not eating anything.
I hear you. But would you walk down for a shear?
I'm not sure.
I'd rather not do it this week because there's a lot of simchas this week. Yoni's making a knife of.
Oh yeah, what's up with Yoni's offer? Is there people going to his offer?
It's in the backyard, I guess. Some.
So I'm going to get.
It is in the backyard. I didn't think about it even.
Yeah.
It's in his backyard. He's having a minion there.
So yeah, that's what I hear.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
So I'm gonna probably be a little late. So
I hear you. So you want to do a Motzei Shabbos? Okay.
Yeah.
So whatever time works for you.
What's the Yanni schedule? The Shabbos? You know what his schedule
I
is?
have no idea.
the one that's walking, I end up getting home late, and I'm not gonna have time to prepare.
Okay.
So let's do 10:30 much Shabbos.
But next Shabbos you're in Jackson, so it's not even an issue, right? There's no
That's right.
chance of early.
So I only have to
You
push
got
it
out
on
of it.
Shabbos.
Okay.
Yeah, but
When are you going up? Yes, when are you going up?
I don't mind. Look, once I'm back here after Jackson's, I'm more than happy to do Shir Shabbos afternoon. That's how we
when are you going up?
it, and we can go back to learning the Sikha again.
Okay.
When are you going up?
I'm going up. Well, I'm moving up today, but I'm not staying there for Shabbos. So we're just getting ready. Then we're gonna come home for Shabbos, and then Sunday we're gonna go.
Okay. Where's your boat?
In Pefferlaw. So that they put in automatically, but I haven't been there for a while.
Have you been on your boat this summer?
I went out once. Yeah. The boys came back to Shiva. They wanted to go.
Where's the Pefferlaw?
Yeah, Pefferlaw is, you know where Jackson's is. So it's
Yeah.
about 15 minutes past Jackson's towards Victoria Lakes.
Which lake? You on Lake Simcoe?
It's on Lake Simcoe, yeah. Pefferlaw is just on the other side of Georgina Island.
Why
It's
can't
just
you dock?
east.
Why can't you dock your